Let's get joined up. This week's show is sponsored by Bandcamp.com, an online record store and music community where passionate fans discover, connect with, and directly support the artists they love. There's thousands of bands and artists on there, including my band, the Rye Dogs, whose second album, Pigs Might Fly, is out right now. Here's a quick snippet of the title track, which is also available on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Music.
Because your eyes may be weeping, but your conscience is sleeping. So baby, don't you cry. Your faces are drying and you say...
It's totally free to join Bandcamp, and as the Rye Dogs are brand new members, we're now looking to grow our fan base, so your support would be greatly appreciated. Just search the Rye Dogs, that's W-R-Y Dogs, and hit the follow button. Right, now we can cue the theme tune.
Joined up writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 167 with actor playwrights Mari and Lowri Izzard, two exciting new comedy writers I was lucky enough to meet at the recent Sky Comedy Rep event held at the Birmingham Rep Theatre. We talked about the challenges of pursuing a career in the arts when coming from a working class background, their advice if you're thinking of trying to write for the stage, dealing with an invisible disability, and how a character should drive your plot. Before that, a swift catch-up from me. This week I made the long drive to Brighton to meet the members of my online critique group in person. The occasion was the paperback release of founding member and previous guest Erica Waller's brilliant book, Dog Days, which I cannot recommend enough. It's very funny, moving, and original story that deals with grief, unexpected friendships, and of course, dogs. I got to meet the other members, SJ Watson, Sarah Bonner, and Alex Thornber, over coffee and cake at Waterstones, and it left me feeling creatively refreshed and revitalised and ready to push on with the revisions of my novel, Safe Hands. Speaking of which, having reread the first draft and making lots of notes of stuff I need to hone, change, amplify and cut, I'm currently working on strengthening the opening chapters to get them into as good a shape as possible and ready for submission to agents. One of the first things that I did on finishing the reread of the draft was to lay out the whole outline of the book, sort of an extended synopsis if you like, and it really did help me to get my head around the book and highlight the themes and areas I should be focusing on in this next draft. It's also a great way to discover which characters are important, because if they only get a single named mention, the chances are they're not essential to the book and they definitely don't deserve a place in the synopsis. So the plan is to redraft the beginning, try to get it singing and build to my kind of inciting incident at a point that happens to coincide with the end of the excerpt I'll be sending to most agents. Hopefully, at which point they'll be dying to find out what happens next. But, you know, best laid plans and all that. Saying it is one thing, but actually achieving it is another, so wish me luck. Anyway, how about you lot? How's it going? Tell me what you're up to, or just drop me a line to say hello, either's fine. You know I love to hear from you, also drop me a line, and the best way to get in touch is via email, wayne@waynekellywrites.com, but you can also tweet me at JUPodcast or drop me a line on the FB page. Also, don't forget to join that email mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk. It's totally free and you get a couple of downloadable goodies when you sign up, and you'll be the first to find out about upcoming shows and events. Right, let's get to today's interview with Mari and Lowri Izzard. So actor-writer duo Mari and Lowri are identical twins hailing from working class roots in Bridgend in South Wales. Whilst filming together on Film4 and BFI comedy feature Brian and Charles, Mari and Lowri realised that they actually really enjoyed working together, and they were selected to write a one-act play for a scheme run by Sky Comedy and the Birmingham Rep, and created a brilliant piece called Spoffin, which I was lucky enough to see and that we talk about in this conversation. So enjoy the chat, and I'll pop back at the end for a sign off.
Joined up writing.
So hi Mari and Lowri, how are you both doing? Why don't you start off by just giving us a sense of, well, how you are, and also tell us where you're both speaking from.
I am Mari, and Lowri is my sister. But I'm in London, and we've just gotten back from finishing up Sky Comedy New Writing Rep, haven't we?
Yep. Mari's in London and I'm in Wales, and we just got back last week from working at the Birmingham Rep and with Sky Studios.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to see that, and I spoke to you briefly there as well, and with your one-act comedy play Spoffin, which was brilliant. So
thank you.
Yeah, it was great. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the play and how you came to write it? And I don't mind who wants to take that.
Go on, Lowri.
Sisterly love.
We're gonna have a lot of this. So I'll take it. Lowri speaking here. So Spoffin is based on the realities of what it's like growing up with an invisible disability, but specifically growing up in a Welsh-speaking community in Wales. And a lot of it was inspired by true events.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was dramatized for the purpose of the comedy and the scheme that we were on.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say the piece was semi-autobiographical, but it's definitely heightened for dramatic purposes and for comedic purposes, definitely.
Yeah, it's based on these two twins, Tamara and Samara, who have aspirations bigger than their own town can offer.
Yeah, and as you say, it is really funny. You've taken it to the limit. I mean, where do you get these crazy ideas from? These Welsh sisters, twins as well, which you should explain to people. This is an audio thing, so they probably don't realise. But yeah, if you haven't worked it out yet, not only are Mari and Lowri sisters, they're twins. They're identical twins. So tell me a little bit more about that. You say it's kind of sort of the jumping off point was an autobiographical thing. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Lowri and I are from a town called Bridgend in South Wales, which doesn't have the best history. I think it's quite a sad town, and actually, socially, economically, like it's very, very working class. There's a history of that sort of like working class depression that comes with like not being really able to talk about your feelings. That's really rooted in in our hometown, I think. And obviously, like growing up as two very creative individuals, I'm not sure we ever really felt like there was much in a town that was so rooted in like trade and
well, it's a manufacturing industrial area. So there are a lot of factories around. We had Ford factory here, we've got Sony factory here. So it's always been an area where lots of people have come here for trade. But unfortunately, the capitalism, the effect of capitalism on the area has meant that the sense of community it's still there, but it's very small in comparison to other parts of Wales.
Yeah, but I think because of that, like obviously the creative arts just don't come at the forefront of decisions. So like
Sure.
Lowri and I, within the Welsh, when you are sent to Welsh school, there's an annual competition called the Eisteddfod, which is not only a celebration of the arts in Wales, but also it was created to encourage the resurgence of the Welsh language after it was banned. So everything is through the medium of Welsh in this competition, and obviously arts is at the forefront of it. So like that juxtaposition of like growing up in this town that doesn't necessarily understand that world versus growing up in a school that was super encouraging of the arts. I think that feeling, that juxtaposition and that feeling of finding where you truly belong. Like I think lots of people can actually really relate to that. And it's not definitely not Welsh specific. So I think that's what Lowri and I were trying to do, was trying to make something that was not only on a micro sort of lens, really specific to our life, but also like on a macro scale, that like you didn't necessarily have to grow up where we grew up or had the same experiences that we did to be able to relate to the piece.
And to add on to that, myself and Mari grew up with an invisible disability, which is a heart condition, and we've never seen anything funny in theatre or TV about invisible disabilities. They always seem to be a little bit serious, and they're always a little bit depressing, and you feel very sorry for the person with the disability. And it got to a point where we were like, wouldn't it be really cool if we wrote something hilarious about having a disability and the contradictions that come with that when you want to achieve something amazing, but is it gonna hold you back, or is it possible for you to own your disability and for it to be a part of you as you're moving forward?
Yeah, and obviously a big part of it, as you say in the play, as regards the invisible disability, is the heart condition, which is obviously really played for laughs and kind of really played up. And in the play, it's I don't know I can't remember which sister it was, but obviously she's got sort of crippling social anxiety, which can then trigger the heart condition. And you know, without wanting to spoil it for anybody that does eventually get to see, obviously use puppets and all sorts of different things to kind of bring it to life. But so how did it kind of affect you guys when you were growing up? And obviously you've been able to turn it into something else and do something else with it, and obviously in this case it's comedy. But how did it kind of affect you on a day-to-day basis, or did it, you know, what sort of effect did it have on you guys?
So I'm going to talk about it, and Mari, feel free to jump in if you want to add anything. But obviously the disability that we put in the play is heightened to what we dealt with in real life. You didn't have
a puppet popping up at the side, or
that
I wish.
Really fun. We were born with a condition called reflex anoxic seizures, and it's basically a condition that was made worse with anxiety, and there are triggers that would set us off. But as I've gotten older, my condition seemed to get worse, and particularly during the pandemic, my anxiety then grew to chronic anxiety. And I guess the play kind of stemmed from all of my hilarious happenings whilst being on a new medication and trying to figure that out. Anyone who's been on sertraline or propranolol will tell you that there are side effects that your body has to get used to, that you either laugh or you cry. And my reaction to it was, well, we might as well laugh about it and stick it in a play. Because, you know, what else is there to do?
And you've got such a short space of time to do it in, so you haven't really got time. I mean, how long was it? 15 minutes or something, the play?
It was 20 minutes.
Oh yeah, you said in the interview, actually, you said you pushed it, but
it was definitely 22 minutes something.
But even so, 20 minutes is not long. You know, you don't get a lot of time to do a lot of world building or anything, or give us lots of exposition. So how did you kind of tackle that, or is it something that you weren't really aware of, you just cracked on and did it?
For me, I wanted to ensure that there was it was predominantly dramatic action. Like I think one of my pet peeves and mistakes that I've made in the past is that I have sat in world building and exposition for too long. And I think when it's a series of 20-minute plays, you've got 9 20-minute plays. So how do you ensure that not only, especially because Lowri and I's were last as well, like how do you ensure that you grab their attention after the audiences have watched 8 other plays about the same theme as yours.
Yeah.
So yeah, dramatic forward-moving action, I think, was the key for us.
Yeah, because we should probably make that clear to people that don't realise. So with the other plays that were on, essentially, I mean, they were all very loosely based on this idea, but it was a great set, but it was kind of loosely based around a kind of park bench setup, wasn't it? So you kind of had to give it some kind of grounding in that. So people had to, that was a kind of jumping off point for it. So you kind of mentioned there, obviously, writing it together, you're performing it together and everything, and you writing it together. Tell me a little bit about that sort of collaboration process, because that's different for everybody. You know, you hear some writing partnerships where it's almost a little bit competitive in the fact that they kind of spur each other on, and you know, I want to be funny, I'm going to do an even funnier joke than you, or you know, it's always reaching for the next thing. Some people it's totally different, and one's more dominant than the other, or one's, you know, they're very supportive. How was it for you guys? How do you kind of work, would you say?
Well, Mari has worked professionally, and she is an award-winning playwright by herself in her own right. So I'll get her to answer, because I'm sure she's got an interesting answer from like working by herself and then collaborating with me. So Mari, you answer, because I'm sure it's really interesting.
She set you up there nicely.
I think thanks, Han.
I'll brag for you, don't worry.
I picked it up, don't worry.
I think it literally just depends on the project, though, doesn't it? Like, when this came up and the application came up, like, they asked for such an obscure response to a theme. Like, the theme was park bench, right? Mm-hmm. And I was just like, I can't imagine anything for this particular scenario that doesn't really involve like that sisterly relationship. Like, and that's when I brought it to Lowri, and I was like, look, I think it would be really, not only would it be really great to work with you as like a writer, because like Lowri has read and reads everything that I've ever written. And so she was technically sort of already writing with me. It just wasn't official.
Yeah.
So when this came up, I just sort of proposed to her, like, maybe we should like actually properly do this together, and like, so that you can get 50% credit
for once. Yeah.
For once.
But yeah, so when we started building the application, I think at that particular time, Lowri was going through some interesting responses medically to going on new medication.
That's putting it very politely, Mari.
So I think at that, right at the beginning, I was leading, but Lowri was definitely still reading every draft and giving good notes and input. And then, like, as we got further into the scheme and suddenly got a place and started to write drafts of the idea, I could see that Lowri's confidence was growing more and more as a writer. So I was stepping back ever so slightly, and we started scheduling, like, so I also work full time as a receptionist, because let's be honest, we need to pay that London rent.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we were scheduling writing days on Saturday mornings, and we would be working on Google Docs together, because obviously Lowri's in Wales and I'm in London.
Yeah.
And that's how we do it. We just write scene by scene, and I think Lowri wrote predominantly Tamara's lines, and I wrote predominantly Samara's lines. And just as the course of the scheme went on, obviously, like, I got busy sometimes and Lowri got busy sometimes, and it was dependent on the deadline and the other commitments in our lives. I was always happy to let Lowri take the responsibility when I couldn't. And and towards the end of the scheme, like, there's this one scene where the heart puppet is doing a conga line, and like, that's all Lowri, but like, had she not gone through that process of like, oh, you can see her confidence growing, it's really lovely to see that by the end she's like her own fully fledged comic writer as well, you know.
Yeah, it's great. And in terms of the actual process, because there'll be lots of people that listen to this, I don't have loads. In fact, I'm trying to think whether I've actually had a playwright on. I think it's always been, I think the furthest we've kind of gone is we've done like screenwriters and different bits and pieces. So in terms of like the actual mechanics of writing a play, if you like, have you kind of got a set process that you kind of approach? Do you think, right, I'm going to block it out in terms of scenes or structure first, or do you just start writing a scene and see where that takes you? Give us a bit of a sense of how that works.
I mean, for this one specifically, because it was also part of a scheme, I think it was within the first month or something like that, we had to send over a rough structural idea of what we wanted to happen within the play.
Uh-huh.
And the only things that ended up staying was the beginning and end. Everything else in the middle of it, when we got to writing it or redrafting, draft 4, draft 5, the middle totally changed, and it went back and forth. So we had a rough idea of what we wanted to achieve, but in the end, we weren't quite sure until we reached the rehearsal draft 5, which was, we actually were fully happy with it once we were in the rehearsal room. And I think it was even after the first week of rehearsals, we locked down draft 5. So yeah, Mari, you were going to say?
I just think it's really difficult to make stylistic choices when you're still building that world. Like, I think we'd written 3 pages of the idea for the initial application, and then the next phase was write down the beat sheet, right? Before we'd even made an attempt of the first draft. And yeah, it was great to get that, you know, that structure down, but like, and know to have a rough idea of where you're heading. But as Lowri said, we didn't really stick to it. Like, we've quickly realized that the beat sheet was overly ambitious, I think. I think the whole process of like writing this play was that we wanted to be ambitious about it. We didn't want it to just be 2 twins sit on a park and talk. Like, we wanted it to change time and space and people, and we wanted the audience to go on a real journey within 20 minutes. I know we come from a point of characters. Like, as actors, characters are the most important thing to us. So therefore the plot had to be led by the characters rather than the plot happening to the characters, if you know what I mean.
Well, that was something I was going to ask you about in general, the fact that there's an overlap there with the fact that you both act. How much of that feeds into your writing, do you think, and what kind of input does it? Obviously, that's one big aspect that you've just mentioned there about character. How else do you think that kind of plays or has played into the way that you write and what you write?
I think we've always been interested, even when we were younger, in the types of actors that we liked were people like Robin Williams, that are very strong character actors.
Yeah.
And Julie Walters, we were massively inspired by her, and how humour and heartbreak were always on that fine line. Like, as much as those 2 actors are brilliant comedic actors, they're also fantastic dramatic actors as well. And I guess that's how we approached this, was that with all of our characters, I mean, you know, including the smaller characters in it that we multi-role, they're based on real people in our lives, that had
apart from the puppets, obviously.
There might be. You say that.
There might be. Say that. You don't know what I was talking about in therapy. You don't know. But as I was saying, even the minor roles that were multi-rolled, they're either based on people that have had a massive effect on us in our lives, or have a massive effect on us in our lives. So it's always from some sense of reality, some sense of authenticity, but then we're a bit bonkers, so we add our sense of humor on top.
And I think for writing characters for us, obviously, as you've said, as actors, that's just where we sit comfortably. So I don't think we quite realize, because this is so subconscious to us by now, characters, and thinking about those tiny details, we just subconsciously make decisions or notice things about human beings that perhaps a more academic writer wouldn't it wouldn't be a comfort zone for them in that same way it's a comfort zone for us. Whereas what we struggle with is structure. How do the characters get on and off? That sort of that kind of stuff,
Because I think there's an argument for saying any writers, people that write novels or whatever, there's a certain element of acting, even if they're not actors and they don't get up on stage and perform and all the rest of it, from the point of view that you have to show a certain level of empathy, or you have to try to get into the heads of people or characters that you would not have anything in common with, and you have to sort of decide how you think they're going to speak and all the rest of it, even in a novel. So that's probably within a lot of writers, but obviously you guys are kind of one of a bunch of only a few people like some of the ones you've kind of mentioned, but people like Phoebe Waller-Bridge or Victoria Wood or whoever kind of write stuff and they get to perform it. Because for most writers, whether that's they've written something that then gets adapted for the stage or the screen or whatever, you kind of you write this thing, it's your baby, and then you just hand it over to somebody else and they do what they will with it. So how does it feel for you guys being able to kind of see the whole process? I know that you had a director and all the rest of it, and it's a collaborative medium, but how does it feel for you guys being able to take it from the blank page literally to the stage?
I honestly, for me, it was overwhelming, because I think that up until now, I've never actually performed in anything that I've written. I've always handed it over, and as I think maybe every writer thinks this, but I like to think that I'm a super chill writer that hands it over, and I'm yeah, so long as you ask me about any changes, I don't mind, whatever.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just
you can do anything, but not that.
Yeah. It's a secret dictator. For me, it was really overwhelming to be a part of the process when they were actually putting it on, and me being able to say those words that actually I remember writing with Lowri on a rainy Saturday, and it made me quite emotional at one point. I remember because we only performed it twice, but I remember just before going on for the first performance, I actively had to hold back tears, because obviously not only the state of the world in which theatre has well and truly made a comeback, and it's nice to be a part of that, but also we wrote this. and that's quite huge, I think.
We were very clear, even before we got on the scheme, when it was coming to interview stages. They were interviewing possible finalists for the scheme, and I remember saying in our interview then that we wanted to be in our own piece. And for me, it's always been a no-brainer, because it is so authentic to our lives. I kind of put my foot down at one stage, because we do come from that acting background. I just couldn't imagine anyone else doing it.
I mean, it was a tough call as well, to be fair.
Yeah.
I mean, you specifically said it's identical twins, and
who speak Welsh, who also have invisible disabilities. So if you can find them, then please
you set the bar high, to be fair.
Bring them forward, but they don't exist apart from myself and Mari. I think they really did try, though. My agent asked the casting director, did you actually hold auditions for this? And they said yes. So they did try.
Wow.
And I think if they could have found identical twins who spoke Welsh who also had an invisible disability, then they would have. But yeah, and I'm kind of the opposite to Mari in that, like, Mari's very good at handing it over. I think I'm quite selfish, and I'm like, no, I've put in the hard work and put in the hours and the slog. I'm going to be in it. Thank you very much.
So in terms of people, there'll be people that are listening to this that may be interested in writing for the stage or whatever. What's sort of the main considerations when you first start writing? You kind of, I think you kind of touched on it a minute ago when you sort of saying about some of the practicalities of it that people probably don't consider, you know, in terms of when there needs to be time to do a set change or a costume change, or what, you know, the actual practicalities of how you move things around and how you get from one thing to another in the transitions. Talk to me a little bit about that and how you kind of picked up those things as you went along, Mari.
I think if the best way that I sort of considered that was either you've got two routes. Either you don't care about stage directions at all, and you don't care about like the technical side of playwriting, and you just write it, and somebody, an amazing director or dramaturg will help you to put that vision on stage, and but you accept that you're not necessarily precious about how the production will happen. Or there's the other side, in which you take the time to do the research, read as many plays as you possibly can, go and see as many plays in real life as you possibly can, so you can feel the energy that the playwright has been intending to create. So the hierarchy in the UK, which is different to everywhere else, is that the playwright tends to be at the top of the pyramid, and then the director tries to honour the vision of the playwright, and thus is, you know, everybody else's job as well. So I would say, like, the best way to learn about writing plays is just to try and absorb as many in whatever possible form is the most accessible way to you. Whether that's reading or by going to see it, or and doing like scratch nights and things, so you can figure out. So it's not like committing yourself to too much. It's committing yourself to a short form, figuring out whether, you know, the idea has legs, and if it does, then continue working. But a playwriting teacher of mine told me about how long it tends to take her to write like a full-length 2-act play, and she told me that it usually takes her 3 years. So be patient as well, because I wish somebody had told me that before.
Yeah, you were trying to knock it off in a couple of days.
Yeah, exactly.
Literally, you have no idea. Literally that. The stories we could tell.
And what do you think have been, other than patience, what have you, some of the other big lessons that you've learned along the way, would you say? And that goes to both of you in terms of, obviously, Lowri, you're kind of quite early on in your journey in terms of, you know, being a playwright and learning the trade. But what have you must have learned a hell of a lot yourself just in this one project.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It was an absolute gift to not only be a part of the scheme and get to meet and have workshops with people at Sky, people from the RSC, people at Birmingham Rep, but also to have my own mini expert by my side, telling me what's rubbish, telling me what's good, telling me the rules whenever I had questions or queries. That was just a blessing. But I guess the main thing that I learned was, with your first draft, just get it down and go as far as you can with it. And then usually the second or the third draft, that's when it begins to get good. And that's how myself and Mari wrote, was like, the first draft was always a bit word vomity, just like, get it down, be as ridiculous and as silly and as stupid as you want it to be. And then the next one, it's all about refining and refining the joke, making the joke clearer. Will the audience understand that joke? And get as many people as you can to read it as well. I think that was really, really helpful, and just being open with your work and not precious. Because the more, I mean, some writers will be totally different, but I found the more opinions we had from the selected people that we trusted, the better the piece became. So that would be my thing that I've taken from this.
And what about you, Mari? Obviously you've been doing it a little bit longer, but were there things even for you in this project that you kind of picked up and that you thought, well, that's kind of showed me a different way of doing it, or maybe something you've learned along the way?
The thing I probably appreciated the most was probably being paired up with, so our mentor was Emma Fryer, who is actor, comedian, writer. She was always so kind with her time. But I think for me, one of the biggest joys about it was not only having her as a mentor, but like having Maddie and Alice as our directors as well, like, and to be mentored and guided by other women in a comedy setting. Like, I wonder how often that actually happens.
Yeah.
And so that it was like an amazing experience to have that incredible team of women around us that was quite literally just going, you can do it, you can do it.
Yeah.
It was about confidence.
So for me it really was about confidence and trusting ourselves, I guess.
This, you may or may not be able to answer this question. Sometimes it stumps people because they think, oh God, I need to think of something, but don't worry about it too much. But what would you say has been the most helpful piece of creative or inspirational advice that you've been given along your way? And that doesn't necessarily have to be really writing specific. It could just be to do with the creative life, or something that you've kind of picked up that you've found been useful in your life and your career. And I'll ask Lowri first.
I guess the one that has just jumped out at me was from one of the very first workshops we had with Anil from Sky and Sean from Birmingham Rep. And Anil said, or maybe it was the second workshop, when we were working on Tartuffe that Anil had adapted for the RSC, he said, but you're not going to get rid of the jokes, right? When he was talking about changing his draft. And that has really stuck with me, in that sometimes you have to put your foot down with things that you find funny and your jokes, and hold on to them. And that him being so precious about his jokes has really stuck with me. And like, but don't get rid of the jokes. Because I think it's the reason why you wrote it in the first place.
Yeah.
Was the joy that those jokes bring. And you can refine them and you can rework them a little bit, but so long as the core of that joke is still there, that's what stuck with me.
That's great. And what about yourself, Mari?
I don't know. There's just so many that it's so hard to choose just one.
It can literally be what's just off the top of your head.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I read something on Twitter last night, because obviously, like, I just follow a load of like screenwriting accounts, and
Me too.
and somebody posted last night that, like, if you're thinking of entering competitions, and any sort of writing competition as a playwright or a screenwriter, put your most exciting work in the first 10 pages. But to get past that first 10 pages, you have to ensure that there's dramatic action and that it's not just exposition. And I think so many writers, and myself included, make that mistake, because we just get so like wrapped up in the detail of how everything works. But like, I think we have to remember that, like, actually we're trying to stand out. So chuck all of the fireworks into the first 10 pages, and once they get past that first 10 pages, that's when you can ensure that the characters are leading the plot, not the other way around.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. So as we kind of move to kind of wrap things up, can you kind of give us a sense of what might be up next for you both, or if there's anything in particular that you're working on, and also tell us where we can find out a little bit more about you online or find you on socials or whatever.
Myself and Mari are working on adapting our idea, possibly for screen, so adapting Spoffin for screen, and seeing whether we can work that out somehow. And what about you, Mari? You've got some musicals that you're working on, don't you?
I've got fingers in many pies. I just like working with other people. I've realized that actually I don't have to be a martyr about it. Like, I don't have to make all the decisions myself. I can work with other people and it'll be a much nicer experience. But at the moment, I'm writing a Welsh language musical with a composer called Emmy Stonelake. But I'm also collaborating with another team of people for a bilingual adaptation of a Shakespeare play, which hopefully is happening in Cardiff over the summer. But who knows?
I've just remembered. Myself and Mari are going to be appearing in a feature film called Brian and Charles with with David Earle and Chris Hayward and Louise Brearley and Nina Sosonia and Jamie Mitchie, and that's going to be coming out in June. So
I've got to say, in all the time that I've been doing this podcast since 2014, that's the first time somebody has said, "Oh, I've just remembered I'm in a feature film that comes out in June." So
I'm so sorry. I've been in work all day. I'm brain dead.
But also, for context, we filmed it 2 years ago, so it's just like, oh yeah, I forgot I did that.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. Okay, that's great.
I totally forgot.
And where can people find you on social media if they want to, or if you want them to, of course?
Of course. Like my username for most things is just Mari Izzard. So MariIzzard.
That's good.
So I'm only on Instagram. I don't do Twitter because I just don't like how accessible you can be to people. Sometimes I'm like, I like a bit of boundaries.
I don't blame you. I can't fault you there.
So my handle on Instagram is Lowri Izzard, so LOWRI-IZZARD.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put all that stuff in the show notes. But for now, thank you very much for both of you coming on Joined Up Writing. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Joined up writing.
There you go. Thanks again to Mari and Lowri, and I'll put all of their links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk, or you can find them in the podcast description on whatever device you're listening to this on. That pretty much wraps it up for this week, but don't forget you can get in touch with all your thoughts on the show, feedback, and to tell me what's going on in your writing world, and you can do that by dropping me an email at wayne@waynekellyWrites.com. Also, remember, you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Overcast, or wherever else you get your podcasts to have the podcast downloaded automatically every single time. Also, remember to leave us a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts, because it really does help others to find the show. Or, just tell one of your mates. That'd be great. So that's it for this week. Thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.